It's time for your daily dose of all things Chicago sports. This is the Daily Score. Now, here's your host, Mark Grote.
Hello and welcome into the program. We had the shocking news yesterday that Craig Counsell was replacing the fired David Ross as the Cubs manager. All the news went down. Cubs eventually made it official. They're expecting to be a press conference, a formal introductory press conference, probably sometime next week. But in the meantime, the Cubs president of baseball operations, Jed Hoyer, was speaking at the general manager meetings in Scottsdale, Arizona, to begin to give us some insight on everything that has happened, why it has happened. And we'll hear from David Ross's side of the way. We won't hear from David Ross, but we will hear Jed Hoyer talking about David Ross. But one thing that does have me a little bit fired up in screening some of this audio from Jed Hoyer, and that is, one of the things that we talked about yesterday was I assumed that if you're going to pay the manager $8 million a year, the highest paid manager by far, second highest right now is Terry Francona, about $4 million plus a year. That's got to mean that you're going to open up the pocketbooks and spend big money on free agents. And I'm not saying you go old school, crazy Yankees style, but, think about somebody like Shohei Ohtani, where maybe we didn't think you were thinking about him earlier. But what you're about to hear from Jed Hoyer kind of puts a little doubt in what I assumed would be the case. Listen to Jed Hoyer.
I'm really excited about our direction and where we're going, and actually in our building process. And I sold Craig on that really hard. But not only the core of players we have on the team, but also the young players we have that are sort of like mounted on the border, so to speak. And then I also feel like, we have, financial flexibility. So I believe in that. And I don't think that we signaled that we're going to have some, crazy aggressive off season. But certainly, like I said, I really like our position. And, if there are moves, even big moves that will help us, continue that trajectory, we'll definitely do it. But I don't think it's a signal that somehow we're going to have the biggest and boldest offseason. If we do, it's because things lined up for us.
Wow. I hate it when GMs speak reasonably like that. We've had enough reasonable. I don't know. I think that if you hire this guy, that part of the plan, even in hiring Craig Counsell, had to have been I don't know, guarantee, but hey, you're with a big market now, actual spending is going to occur. And to me, it still wouldn't make sense that you pay the manager $8 million a year and you're saying that I don't know where everybody's getting this. We're going to be crazy and aggressive. Hey, no half stepping. Let's go all in here. David Ross is gone. You bring in Craig Counsell, you better do something with it beyond just hiring the manager. Let's move on a little bit here, too, and some of the things that Jed Hoyer had to say. And look, we all know that Craig Counsell is a good manager. I mean, you can look at the record, you could look at individual moves, you can just kind of study his demeanor. I've talked to Craig Counsell before, like in a group setting, never really one-on-one, but I've been in plenty of dugout meetings with Craig Counsell. And yeah, he's very assured of himself. He's very smart. He speaks intelligently, all that good stuff. But let's hear it from Jed Hoyer on why Craig Counsell is a good manager.
I think that he's consistently, year after year after year, they've outperformed expectations, which is really impressive. And listen, it's not a one-man show up there. They've had two really capable people running baseball operations up there. They've done a really good job in Milwaukee. They're like a very worthy rival, and all the things that they've done. So I think this, making this Craig Counsell was the whole reason. Now, of course not, but I do think, consistently they've outperformed expectations, and that's borne out both with your eyes and when you look at the data.
Yeah, I mean, that's a reasonable answer, and it makes sense, and it shows that obviously he sees what the rest of us are seeing in somebody like Craig Counsell. One thing I don't know, and I expressed this some yesterday. I don't remember if I did on the podcast or if I did it in the short show that I did on the Score yesterday, but I'm not positive that this move was made just because Craig Counsell was available. it's very convenient to say that, oh, well, we had to upgrade. We had no choice in here. My guess is the Cubs were eventually looking to replace David Ross. So they clearly were not all in, because if they really thought David Ross was a good manager who had room to grow, then you don't do this. So I do think that they were looking for an exit strategy eventually with David Ross. To that end, I haven't heard this response yet. Did what happened to the Cubs down the stretch? They choked. They had a 3.5 game lead for the second wild card spot on September 7th, and then they didn't make it. Does that play into the firing?
Whether our season had played out in a smooth way, or whether the ups and downs had happened or not, I think I said at the end of the year something to the effect of, I felt like we left wins on the table, and I still feel that way now. I think I look at, we have plus 95 or 96 run differential. I think we're the only team that was above average in run prevention and run scoring to not make the playoffs. Like, it does bother me, and that's not on one person, and that's on me and every person in the organization. But it felt like we left wins on the table, regardless of like the way it happened. Because I do think it was amazingly impressive to win like we did for those 3 months, but it's still, like I said, it feels like we left wins on the table.
Yeah, that does sound to me like what happened, the collapse of the Cubs, this version of it. Yeah, he said it. This does bother me, and he went to the generalities then and said that it's everybody, but yeah, that did have something to do with it. Now, I think that, to be clear, I mean, the Counsell thing expedited it, but I think ultimately David Ross wasn't their manager. The human side of this is something that's very easily neglected, I suppose, and it's easy to neglect when we're talking about guys making millions and millions of dollars. And David Ross has had a great professional life, especially his time with the Cubs has led him to heights that he probably would not have gotten to anywhere else, in terms of just being in the sweet spot, right time, right place. And he became a celebrity in his own way. But he still got the gut punch that he was told that somebody else is better at their job. So Jed Hoyer spoke behind his back and brought in Craig Counsell. So that said, what was David Ross's reaction to the firing, Jed Hoyer?
The details that I want to keep between us, but as expected, he was amazingly respectful. I've been with him a little bit in Boston way back when, and then for quite a while here. And the hardest part, when I think about his tenure and sort of what he went through, is that we've had a lot of really tough moments together. COVID was a bizarre year. I thought he handled that really well. Year two, we got out of the gates pretty well, but then we ended up faltering, and we ended up selling the whole core, and having to deal with him on a day-to-day basis when we just traded all those guys away was really hard. Really difficult to do that. And he was a great partner through all that. And so, like I said, we've been through a lot together. Obviously, it was a very hard, emotional conversation, but I think the world of him. I think he's got an amazingly bright future. He'll clearly land on his feet and have a great career in this game for a long time. But there was obviously a suddenness to all of this that was unavoidable, but unfortunate.
Yeah, man. Poor Jed Hoyer is, that's going to, of course, they're going to have a strained relationship now. There's no doubt about it. Just like Jed Hoyer probably has a strained relationship with Anthony Rizzo and Chris Bryant and Javier Baez and all that. So whether any of, that's a whole different story in terms of questions about those guys. But I will say, Jed Hoyer, there is a fearlessness about him, and he does not let emotional ties stand in the way, or maybe he's learned not to let friendships and not get too close to people, because obviously there's questions, did the Cubs keep that core together too long? And I think that they admitted that maybe they did wait too long to break it up. So Jed Hoyer is absolutely ruthless when it comes to these kinds of things. I'd be very interested to hear what Ross has to say. about all this. I assume that he will eventually talk about it, but I imagine he's pretty pissed right now and a little bit embarrassed and a little like hit to the ego, because that's exactly the way I would feel. So we shall see moving forward. Looking forward to that, to the press conference. And don't worry, we'll get back to our regularly scheduled Bears content tomorrow, would be my guess, unless the Cubs do something crazy again. So thanks as always for listening to the Daily Score. For our producer, Ray Diaz, I am Mark Grote. This is the Daily Score.